The first time my daughter ever called me crying, she was just a little girl who'd lost her shoe at the county fair. The second time, she was 29, calling from a jail cell because of her own father-in-law. That was the moment I understood something. The strongest revenge isn't loud anger, it's quiet patience. My daughter, Grace, has always been the kind who puts everyone else first. She worked hard, treated people with respect, never expected praise for simply doing the right thing. As her mother, I was proud of her, even when I kept my distance, telling myself that giving her space was the best way to show love. I wonder now if that was really love, or just me avoiding my own fear of getting too close and watching her struggle anyway. A few years earlier, Grace married a good man named David. His father, Richard Calloway, owned a successful trucking company and offered Grace a management position. At first, it looked like generosity. I learned later that Richard liked control far more than family. He was calm, polite, calculated, never raised his voice, which somehow made him more frightening, not less. Everything changed one Tuesday evening when Grace called me in tears. She'd been arrested, accused of stealing nearly $4,000 from the company fuel account. My hands went cold around the phone. I knew, with a certainty that lived somewhere deeper than logic, that my daughter would never steal from anyone. "Who reported you?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Her voice cracked. "Richard did. He called the police himself." As I dug into what actually happened, it got worse. Richard hadn't asked Grace a single question. He hadn't looked at the evidence himself. He'd simply ordered his security manager to build a case, leaning on badge records that placed Grace at the fuel depot during the theft. Except Grace had been in another city that entire afternoon, in a business meeting with 3 coworkers who could vouch for her minute by minute. I called Richard myself, hoping, foolishly maybe, that this was a terrible misunderstanding I could talk my way out of. He stayed completely calm, told me it was simply business, that Grace would get her chance to defend herself through the legal process. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said my daughter should have read her employment contract more carefully. That coldness hurt worse than any shouting could have. Not everyone at that company stayed silent, though. A long-time office manager named Rosalind believed Grace had been treated unfairly. She'd seen enough over the years to recognize a setup when it walked past her desk. While quietly reviewing company records on her own time, she found something that changed everything. The security badge system had been malfunctioning for days, spitting out false entries no one could actually trust. Rosalind didn't say a word to anyone at the office. She printed the maintenance reports herself and slipped them directly to Grace's attorney, the first real proof that this whole case had been built on broken software and a man who never bothered to check. I was furious. I won't pretend otherwise. There were nights I sat in my kitchen gripping a cold cup of tea, replaying Richard's calm voice in my head until my jaw ached from clenching it. But I refused to let that fury make my decisions for me. I'd learned a long time ago that anger makes noise, and noise rarely wins anything. So I waited. I gathered facts quietly, the way I'd learned to do decades earlier in a life Richard knew nothing about. More than 10 years before any of this happened, when Richard's trucking company had been weeks from bankruptcy, I quietly arranged financing for him through an investment firm I controlled. He never knew it was me. My name never touched the paperwork. Buried inside that old financing agreement was one clause almost nobody remembers reading, that if the company ever caused serious legal or financial harm to an employee without proper board approval, the loan holder could take temporary operational control of the business. Richard had skimmed right past it years ago, certain it would never matter. He never imagined the loan holder was me. He never imagined it would matter now. I called my own attorney and asked her to verify every line of that contract before we moved an inch. We followed it exactly as written, nothing more, nothing improvised. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Grace started collapsing on its own. Her coworkers confirmed her alibi. The faulty badge logs went straight to the prosecutor's desk. Within weeks, all charges against my daughter were dropped. There had simply never been proof she'd done anything wrong. Only after her name was fully cleared did I walk into Richard's office, my attorney beside me, a manila folder in my hand that had been waiting 11 years for this exact moment. I sat down across from him and explained calmly who had actually saved his company all those years ago. Then I placed the original financing contract on his desk. I watched him read it. I watched the color drain slowly from his face as he reached the clause he'd never once thought to worry about. The clause he'd ignored for over a decade had just activated because of his own reckless decision to destroy my daughter's reputation without asking a single question first. Under the terms of the agreement, company operations went into temporary review. The security manager who'd fabricated the evidence was dismissed. So was the executive who'd approved the accusation without ever conducting a real investigation. I want to be honest about something. This was never about revenge for its own sake. I didn't do it to watch Richard suffer. I did it because I couldn't stand the thought of some other employee, someone without a mother holding an 11-year-old contract in a drawer, going through exactly what Grace went through and having no one to save them. For the first time since I've known him, Richard's voice cracked. "She's family," he said, like the word had only just occurred to him. "She was already family," I answered quietly, "when you had her arrested." He didn't have a response to that. There wasn't one. In the months that followed, Grace rebuilt her life with David. Rosalind, the office manager who'd risked her own position by quietly telling the truth, was finally promoted into the leadership role she'd deserved for years, long before any of this happened. Richard stayed with the company technically, but he no longer controlled its daily operations. Eventually, he came to see Grace and David in person and offered an apology that actually sounded like one. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a start, and sometimes a start is all you can honestly ask someone to give you. Looking back now, I understand something I got wrong for years. I used to believe that loving my daughter meant staying out of her way, letting her fight her own battles, giving her space instead of getting close. I was wrong about that. Sometimes the deepest form of love isn't distance. It's quietly stepping in the moment the people you love can no longer protect themselves. Even if it takes 11 years, one buried paragraph, and a patience you never told anyone you were carrying. Justice doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits down across the desk, and waits exactly as long as it needs to.